Hi everybody, welcome. I'm Jessica from Jessica Adele Consulting Services, and today I've made this video it's dedicated about the sociopath. You'll recall in my previous video I dedicated it to identifying the prototype of the narcissist, and this one specifically about sociopathy. What is a sociopath? A sociopath is a person with little to no conscience. He or she lacks on a biological level this awareness and the ability to understand other people's feelings. They don't really have that ability to empathize with other people's feelings. If you look at the DSM terms the sociopath and the psychopath with a P under the same umbrella of antisocial personality disorder. Some mental health care professionals argue that the sociopath and the psychopath both reference the same disorder, and also there's other experts that contend that these two are distinct terms. But for the purpose of this segment, I'll take the first view and refer to this antisocial personality disorder as the sociopath. I'll be descriptive in my reference to this interpersonal characteristic of the sociopath, particularly within the dynamic of intimate partner relationships. Understandably, yourself, you might identify with the personality of the psychopath in other contexts, maybe familial or within the workplace or in friendship settings or other dynamics. But for this segment, I'll limit the scope of the discussion to the sociopath within intimate partner relationships. As a disclaimer to this video, only mental health care professionals can diagnose the disorder. If you resonate with this video and you feel the need to get help, I'd urge you to consult with a licensed practitioner with extensive experience, particularly within personality disorders. I'm not a mental health care professional. I am an Australian lawyer and a family dispute resolution practitioner. So to that extent, I can guide you and coach you through your journey of recovery by helping you unpack and identify that personality and how to deal with those particular type of personalities in order for you to seek safety and protection during your recovery and healing. So what is so concerning about being in an intimate partner relationship with a sociopath as opposed to a narcissist? You remember from my previous video, I spoke about the narcissist dynamic in a relationship. Sociopathy and narcissism are separate, distinct psychological disorders. Both personalities cause harm to themselves as well as to others, especially when they're at the end of the spectrum with the manipulative and exploitive behaviors of others. You may also be faced with a case where you're dealing with a person that exhibits both of those disorders. Typically, persons diagnosed as sociopaths have many narcissistic traits, but this psychological disorder is typically more dangerous. Why is it more dangerous? Because sometimes it's hard and challenging to spot that a person is a sociopath, because they tend to be very skilled at wearing masks and projecting to the world a really skilled image of themselves. They tend to be masters at manipulation, and that's not something you can easily spot. I found a good description by a forensic psychologist in Louisiana, Daryl Turner, which explains the difference between the sociopath and the narcissist. Basically, he says that whereas a narcissist may occasionally harm people as a result of their behavior of self-prioritizing, the harm that they cause to another person is unintentional. And more often than not, it's a consequence of their self-obsession rather than them having that motivation which drives them to behave like that around people. A sociopath, on the other hand, essentially gets off by hurting other people, so it's more deliberate, if you will. The sociopath is not really interested in anybody else's rules. He or she have their own set of rules, and they tend to be outward to the public, more charming in their appearance, and they're more excited about things. They're more exciting than narcissists, so they tend to live for that hype. Sociopaths are especially dangerous because they go through that extra effort to hide their true personality, and they try to appear likable to the public. So here on the screen you can see an image of this person who is a famous serial killer and a sociopath. That's Ted Bundy. So I'm not saying that all sociopaths are serial killer. That's not the case. This personality is an extreme case. If you look him up, you can see how he used his charm and his personality to lure in a lot of women, where he ended up killing them in several ways. Usually in a relationship dynamic, the partner of the sociopath is subject to violence through the behavior and the manipulative tactics of the sociopath, which typically leaves the victim, or I'll refer to the victim as the survivor, feeling berated and abused emotionally or psychologically during and after the end of that relationship. So as a result of that, the survivor is left in need of that additional support to cope in the aftermath of this destructive relationship. So what are the common traits of a sociopath? Well, as I said earlier, they're lacking in empathy, and that's found to be a biological lacking empathy, where they don't have that ability to feel or empathize with other people and other people's feelings, their needs or sufferings, or what another person's going through. They have no sense of remorse after hurting someone or mistreating another person. They're also incapable of mutually intimate relationships, because for them, exploitation is their primary way of relating to other people. And they see people as potential targets for their needs and wants. And that can manifest in behaviors of deceitful behaviors towards the other party, or intimidation to control others. Sociopaths tend to be very hypercritical, and they usually lead a secret or double life. As I said earlier, they like to be in control in a relationship. They like to dominate the relationship. And empaths tend to gravitate towards sociopath, or it's more so that sociopaths tend to target empaths, people with that empathetic personality. In the beginning stages of a relationship, sociopaths have that habit of idealizing the person and making them feel that they're so special by showering them with so much affection. And that essentially gets the other person hooked into that. They overwhelm their partner with so much affection, and then they take it away, zap. So it's like that phenomenon of love bombing. Down the track in the relationship, this later moves into the stages of devaluing the partner, and the sociopath tends to then discard the partner when he or she no longer meets his or her needs. So at the beginning of the relationship, the sociopath wants to know everything about the person that they're getting to know, whether they're courting them or whether that's in a dating setting. But they tend to share less about themselves. They just give the other person enough information so that that person has an understanding of the sociopath, but they don't give any personal information that's deep, and they usually tend to gloss over their childhood or put forward another story about their childhood. So they don't really get that personal, and they tend to focus on the other person. Okay, so what are the abusive tactics that sociopaths display within a relationship? Well, they play a lot of mind games, and they use tactics such as discounting the other person's reality or denying the other person's reality, trying to trivialize the other person or divert what they're saying to other topics. So usually they tend to undermine the spouse, or they threaten the spouse. So it's a whole range of manipulative behaviors that form a combination of emotional and psychological abuse. They also use emotional tactics like victimization, and they withhold their feelings, they withhold love and affection. They tend to blame the spouse as well, and sometimes display passive aggressive behavior towards the spouse. I think some experts also say that they tend to be, the sociopaths tend to be moody as well, and moody within the relationship dynamic. So besides that manipulative behavior that they display and the tactics that they display towards their spouse, they also have that same mentality when they're dealing with other people. So whether that's within their family, within their parents, siblings, or with other people that they're dealing with. So they have that mindset of manipulation and control. They have a very strong tendency of relating with other people in the sense of they seek to use other people to benefit their personal gains. So it's not about coming with the other person to understand and meet the person, have a respectful interaction, but it's more so to use the person for their personal gain. And also in a partnership dynamic, they tend to isolate the spouse from hanging out with, say, the spouse's parents, families, and siblings. So they always want to monitor the spouse and keep the spouse around. What are the effects or the manifestations of these abusive tactics on the receiving partner, on the spouse, or let's call it the target? Okay, personally, I don't like referring to the target in our discussion as a victim, but it is an objective fact, so I will use that to the extent that I'm referring to the impact of the abuse on the other person. But in reality, I like using the word survivor because as a survivor, there's not, that stigma is not there, and the woman or man or LGBTI feel more empowered to take back control of their lives. But I'm just using the term victim just to make that distinction with the perpetrator, if I do. So the victim, the spouse or victim in this case, ends up feeling not good enough within that dynamic. There's always a sense of the victim not feeling good enough because of the implications and the long-term effects of that emotional abuse by the sociopath. Some of the tactics that are applied are like the gaslighting effect. The gaslighting effect is a form of psychological abuse in which false information is presented in such a way as to make the target or the partner doubt his or her own memory and perception of reality and what's happening. So this may even involve denial by the abuser or the perpetrator that previous abuse incidents did ever occur. So then you have the victim is left there questioning, didn't he just hit me a few days ago? Didn't he say that? And the victim ends up querying what happened in reality because of those gaslighting tactics that are so controlling, and they make the victim question her reality. They're persuasive as well. In any case, the objective is to arise that sense of extreme anxiety and confusion in the target or the victim, to the extent that she or he reaches a point where they're not able to trust their own judgment. So that feeling is described, that reality is described as similar to the techniques that are used in brainwashing or victims of torture, where the same instruments of psychological warfare. Basically, the end game is where the target, the gaslightee, if you call it, which is often the empath, they think they're going crazy, something's going wrong, because they're sitting there questioning what happened in their perception in the past, and then they're faced with another situation where the sociopath is telling them another reality of what they should believe. So in cases of domestic abuse, the common pattern is that the perpetrator cannot take no for an answer. So say the spouse chooses or decides to leave the relationship, if he or she has the courage to do that, they're always faced, in most of the cases, they're faced with resistance from the perpetrator. And the sociopath insists on contact with the target. And they usually do that, so they don't abide by the laws, and they usually do that in violation of, say, AVOs or apprehended domestic violence orders, if those are in place as well. So no restraining orders or anything stop them from really trying to get back that sense of control after the relationship. So as I said earlier, the gaslightee or the target is left living in fear of doing the wrong thing. So on an emotional level, the victim's confidence has been eroded. During and towards the end of that relationship, they're often left feeling in shock and disbelief about what happened. They're usually very sad, and they experience a lot of guilt and shame, anger, loneliness, confusion, fatigue, anxiety, flashbacks, and dissociation. So they have flashbacks to the traumatic incidents within the relationship, and sometimes their reaction, the coping mechanism, is to dissociate from that experience. And then sometimes the victim or the target ends up questioning in the aftermath of that relationship, whether the lies or the emotional abusive words that were used by the sociopath, the victim ends up questioning themselves: am I really too sensitive? Am I a people pleaser? And then, because they're left questioning their sensitivity, that people-pleasing behavior tends to manifest a bit larger, in the sense that during recovery, they're always a bit more cautious when in their interactions with others. They're worried whether the other person's needs are there, or they sometimes tend to put the other person's needs before theirs, because of that experience that they had, where they were conditioned to basically put the sociopath or the narcissist or that perpetrator's needs before theirs. So in cases where you have systemic and prolonged gaslighting, or that prolonged interaction with the sociopath, over the course of time, the victim ends up experiencing PTSD, and they suffer depression as well. So there's some experts that actually believe that the life and the physical safety of a battered woman or a man, so let's say battered woman in this case, is the safety of the battered woman is really the greatest in danger after she has left that violent partnership. and that's if she chooses or has the courage to leave the relationship. And sometimes when the target cannot leave the relationship, experts describe that dynamic of the relationship as playing out as similar to Stockholm Syndrome. In sociopathic abuse, this may occur where the victim of abuse may bond with her captor as a defense mechanism. That phenomena is known as traumatic bonding. Both parties end up coping in the relationship by rationalizing and excusing the behavior of the sociopath. So some people looking from the outside might say to that victim, why don't you leave the relationship? Why can't you leave? Why can't you escape? But in reality, what's happening is there's that situation, that dynamic that's similar to Stockholm Syndrome, where there's traumatic bonding and there's justifying between both parties. You have the victim ends up justifying her reality and what she's experiencing, and sort of really excusing that abusive and manipulative behavior. Okay, so this power and control wheel there that we have on the screen is the Duluth model. I firstly came across it when during the course of my studies, when I was being accredited as a family dispute resolution practitioner. That wheel there you can see really shows the power and control dynamic, and that's not for just sociopathic relationships or narcissistic relationships, but usually this power and control wheel that you can see on the screen, that one that gives a lot of victims some closure or a clear way of identifying what they have been experiencing in their situation. So you can see there in the middle of the screen, there's the power and control within the wheel. And then on the top, there's the sexual violence and the physical type of abuse. If you can see there that they're the manipulative tactics there. So the perpetrator tends to use economic abuse, coercion and threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation. Like I said before, they tend to minimize, deny, and blame the other person's reality. And if you're in a setting where you have children, they tend to use the children as a tactic to get their needs met. And they threaten by saying, I will take the kids away. And the perpetrator, usually it comes from a gender privileged dynamic. Now, I think the Duluth model is kind of helpful where you're faced with, well, usually it's used in a setting where a woman was dealing with a misogynist or people who are patriarchal, men who are patriarchal. And like I said, I don't want to limit this reality to the man being the perpetrator, because we have a lot of cases where the women can be the perpetrator as well. So as I said earlier, this wheel is useful in the sense that it can help the victim identify what are the types of abuse that they're experiencing. And that's not just necessarily limited to a psychopathic dynamic or the narcissistic relationship, but that's domestic type of abuse, the broader power and control type of abuse within relationships. So I'll save the link for you down there at the bottom, so you have that wheel in front of you to see if it resonates with you. And I'll also put the other wheel there, which basically shows the comparison with healthy relationships and how they're based, because part of this thing is sort of unlearning the past toxic dynamic and then coming to discover that relationships can be based on equality mutual respect, collaboration. So that's part of the healing journey. And I'll put that wheel in the description box. Okay, so is there any hope for the target or the victim in the aftermath of ending such a destructive relationship? I would say, of course there is. You can always take back your power. Now, obviously, it takes time to heal and to go through that recovery process. That's why if you feel drawn to seek treatment from a mental health practitioner, then do so in order to assist your recovery. But healing does take time, and you really need to be very patient with yourself and honor the feelings and the experiences that are coming up for you. And most importantly, it's important for you to know that you do have a choice to leave the relationship, and you do not have to stay there, and you do not have to tolerate that type of abuse. You always have the choice to escape. Obviously, you can seek support of people like myself and other people around you that can support you to leave that relationship, so you don't feel stuck, and so that you don't so you're not inclined to go back to that situation, because essentially you really deserve to be respected as a person. You deserve to live in freedom, and you deserve that type of love that's based on respect and mutuality, and that's not controlling by nature. So you will always be supported when you leave. It's about setting that mind frame that I will leave, and I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. But it takes a lot of courage, and that's why it's important to get support around you. And most importantly, that support will help you as well to understand that we always have these stories going on, especially if you've been a victim. Your self-esteem would be very affected. So you might have these stories that play out in your head where you don't feel that you deserve someone else, or maybe at some internal level, your inner child believes that you deserved that abuse. So you're not indebted to the other person, and you shouldn't feel sorry for them. You need to do what's very important to seek your own safety, your own recovery, whether you have children or not. There's always plans that can be worked around that to assist you. So that's it from me for today. This was a bit of a lengthy video, but I really hope that you found some value in it. And that's all from me for now. If you would like to connect with me, please reach out to me on Jessica at jessicaadeleconsultingservices.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram at empowered_warrior. I haven't worked yet on my website. I've been kind of busy with my other contract at the moment, but if you would like to connect with me or just have a chat, please feel free to reach to me. And that's it from now. I wish you a good day. Thank you, and bye-bye.